evening, everyone. Tonight is Friday, January 29th, and you are in Thinking and Learning for Graphic Designers. Contrary to popular belief, graphic designers do think. And tonight we are going to focus on Chapter 4 of Thinking Collaboratively, Learning in a Community of Inquiry by D. Randy Garrison. Let me introduce myself. My name is Jeremy Segrist, and I am a graphic designer and instructional designer and a 20-year Navy veteran, and I will be your guide tonight. So before we get started, let's go ahead and do a quality check. If you can't hear my voice, hopefully you are reading the slide and can adjust. If you can hear me though, go ahead and use the pointer tool up at the top on the whiteboard tools and point to the bottom green box on the slide, if you will, so we can be sure everyone is able to hear the presentation. Very nice. Thank you. Tonight, our learning objectives are going to be that upon completion of this web conference, the viewers will be able to describe in their own words how technological developments have led us to where we are now in terms of distance and blended learning. You will also be able to hopefully describe how our current technological environment has affected the teaching and training environment. And lastly, you'll be able to describe how technological advances have changed the way graphic designers learn and practice their craft. So let's go ahead and do a mental exercise to start our class today. Someone go ahead and use the raised hand function in the bottom right and tell me, using your mic, how long you believe the World Wide Web has been open to the public. Just take a guess. Lauren?
I'm going to guess over 20 years, about 22 years maybe.
22 years. That's a really, really good guess, actually, because the truth is the World Wide Web has only been around since 1991, so it's a little over 21 years. And I apologize if this makes some of us feel old. I know it does me, but Tim Berners-Lee began using his computer network, which he developed for CERN, only 32 years ago, and the first official website went on that network in 1990. That's only 21 years ago. In that short amount of time, we have seen the switch from only interacting with content to actually interacting with people, and sometimes on a truly meaningful level. This has changed and permeated almost every area of our lives. Smartphones, social media, which is not so social sometimes, and even smart appliances and smart homes have become the norm. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that along with this technological integration, some real changes have occurred in some of our fundamental institutions. Notably, and for the purposes tonight, most importantly, our educational systems have seen an unprecedented change at virtually every level. Everything from the way information is delivered to how classes are designed. All of this has been changed. So as we begin to explore how education has changed and how this in turn has affected the discipline of graphic design, in the chat window, go ahead and tell me one way in which technology has affected your life, or more importantly, one way in which you use technology now that you would not have envisioned when you were younger. And for my virtual students, go ahead and email me your responses at my Wright State email, segrist.16@wright.edu. So what do you guys think? How is technology used now that you would not have envisioned when you were younger? Yeah, for sure. Texting, email. Email came along very early along, and I remember the very first time I saw it. It was set up almost as a display in a mall, and I couldn't believe that there were people talking from around the world. It was almost ridiculously crazy. So, how did we get here? Well, to find out how we got here, we need to know where we came from. So we need to define where here is. And what we are experiencing currently is the blending of two different styles of learning, essentially distance and in-person learning. Distance learning, as it used to be known, was based on something called the industrial paradigm, which essentially left the student with almost no interaction or feedback in many cases. And there was no feedback with the peer group or the instructor. It used to be that these classes were delivered in whole to the person. So in my personal experience, you would see people in the Navy get into a distance learning class, and they would be delivered the entire class and then expected to go through the class, find a facilitator for the test, and send the test in, thereby passing the class with no interaction at all from anybody. In-person learning was the other side of that coin, or as the text called it, location-based learning. Pre-technology shift, this was based on lecture and delivery. And again, in many cases, this left very little room for any kind of true interaction. By this point, though, even though it had higher completion rates, the amount of information retention wasn't much better. So what do you think? What were these systems of education lacking? I'm going to go ahead and throw a poll up, and you tell me which of these you think is the correct answer. Well, the correct answer to this actually is C, a lack of interaction. In both the traditional learning styles before technological advances basically saturated our higher learning and distance learning communities, the lack of any true interaction opportunities was a hampering factor, and this was essentially across the board. However, as technology advanced and we became increasingly connected through communication technologies, time and space became uncoupled. And I borrowed that directly from the text. And what that means is that classes could be both synchronous or asynchronous, meaning you could be there or not be there and still provide meaningful interaction opportunities, which is the bedrock for all learning. This new kind of learning environment was coined blended learning because it technically merged parts of both distance and in-person learning, even though it was sort of a new animal all by itself. The biggest change in this blended learning environment, which had the largest impact, I believe, was that there became multiple opportunities for the student to interact with both the instructor and their peers. And this drove class size to be smaller. Along with that, the written word is just more conducive to deep and meaningful thought. And in the blended learning environment, there was a rise in opportunity, therefore, for truly meaningful interaction. This new environment really did change how the teachers, I needed to back up there. This new environment really changed how the teacher's role was performed, and it shifted focus on the teacher being just an information deliverer to the leader of a collaboration or inquiry process. So now we can move forward. How do you feel about this? Go ahead and grab an emoticon in the chat box that you feel best describes your attitude or interaction with online learning. And go ahead and be prepared to discuss your response. For my virtual learners, go ahead and email me at the address on the screen. Please keep your answers in one email if possible. So I can see a smile, and I think Lauren meant to smile and Brianna meant to smile as well. I think that's actually a laughing emoticon. I guess I could take that in several different ways. But I kind of feel the same way. I mean, you know, online learning has kind of become the standard now. On the most basic level, what this means for designers, however, is that whether we're students or teachers, we can go and learn from top tier designers no matter where we live. Whether we live in the designing mecca of New York City or we live in the middle of Wyoming, we can still get the same level of instruction. Because collaboration is sort of intrinsic to the process of learning, and it's also intrinsic to the framework of all these communication technologies. So instead of just being instructed on the design process, we are part of that collaborative learning environment always from the earliest levels of the educational process now. So not only is this good for the learner, but it's an essential practice for when a designer enters the real workforce. So show me Show me your design acumen. And with the whiteboard pen tool, go ahead and draw a circle around the program or programs. First of all, let me do this. Raise your hand if you know what these programs are. Thank you. Thank you, Brianna. Lauren, right on. Bobby, okay. So go ahead and use the pen tool and draw a circle around the program which you believe has benefited the most from an online learning environment, or which of the programs listed here have the most collaborative potential for the practicing designer. Well, I would say you're right, because the truth is that all of them have benefited. The internet has advanced really rapidly, and along with it, entire structures of learning have changed and morphed, arguably and quantifiably for the better. So in conclusion, the old paradigms of industrial learning are gone, and time and space have been decoupled, allowing more opportunities for interaction at all levels of the instructional process. And as designers, we're always in collaboration with our clients and other designers and our bosses. Not only are the communication technologies we use now more conducive to practicing graphic design, as is mostly evident by the growing community of non-location specific freelance designers. The actual design programs themselves, as we saw in the earlier slide, are being shaped by the technological landscape to allow for greater communication, interaction, and collaborative opportunities. Specifically with the Adobe suite, which is what I put on there earlier, they use something called shared libraries. So you can actually share a file out of Photoshop to InDesign to a person who is nowhere near your geographic location. They can edit it in InDesign and send it back to you just by dragging and dropping into that shared library. Graphic design is always changing, and thank you for being here tonight. I hope you learned a little something, or that something was presented that made you think about these concepts. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email me at my Wright State email, and have a good night.